Don't mind telling you that tonight is bittersweet for me. You have made it so wonderful to be here. From the very time that I arrived at the motel and found an awesome basket full of goodies, I don't know who to say thank you to, but whoever did that or was part of that, thank you. And then the lunch Sunday and each meal each night, the various times that we've had to discuss and visit and get to know each other before and after the class each day, as well as the evening sessions. I'm going to take back part of you with me. The love and the kindness and the encouragement that you have been. I want you to know that in the blessings that I have, and various ones, gospel preachers go different places. But folks, you've got some special things here at Adamsville. And what we just engaged in is one of those special things. First of all, I have so many very good song leaders. But the way you sing, the blending together of your voice, and truly a sweet sound unto the very throne of God. And ladies, you help make that a part. All four voices. Beautifully done. I want to express my appreciation to the eldership. I'm encouraged and strengthened by every time I've had an opportunity to talk with any one of your elders. I hope that you know how blessed you are. I hope that you know that that is not what is enjoyed at many congregations. Faithful men who want to lead and guide and help this congregation get to heaven. And the love that they show to you in many ways, sometimes behind the scenes, sometimes here in front of you. But truly work together with them, as I know it's evident that you do. I'm impressed with your preachers. Certainly to have working together, hand in hand, their families as well, preaching the gospel, joining hands with you as a family. It's encouraging. It's so thrilling to have a church of the Lord's people working together. Oh, I know that you're not perfect. Somebody made this statement, said, after I did this one time and I said something complimentary, a man came up to me and said, well, you just don't happen to know where the warts are. Well, I don't care whether there are warts. And I have no doubt, but what there probably are some. We're human, you know. But I am so thankful and so honored to be a part of this series. And I hope our paths cross again. You know, I did find out something, though, on the way down here. It's not any further from there to here than it is from here to there. Did y'all know that? I mean, you can come to see us anytime you want. You can come to the house if you want. We'll put water in the beans and we'll eat together and we'll just have a good time. And certainly to have you anytime would be a joy. Tonight, I want to talk about something that has been very captivating and mesmerizing to me for many years. And I'm going to ask your patience in the very beginning because it may not seem at first like a sermon. But for many years, I have been captivated by the Titanic, the tragedy that took place over 100 years ago. I have almost every DVD or VHS tape and the coffee table books and things of that nature. I spend more time probably reading than maybe any other subject beside obviously the Bible. The thing that took place that night, though, a tragedy of tragedies that actually did not have to happen. And as you begin to gather all the facts, you realize it was a phenomenal vessel, crew, gathering of people, an event of literally the century. We can talk about those that were passengers as well as the crew. We know how many approximately died on what seemed to be at that time and was the greatest vessel that had ever been built. Oh, in comparison to our cruise liners today, it failed. It was so small in comparison. But then, over 100 years ago, it was literally unbelievable what they were able to accomplish. For some time, I have watched, when we had the space program, the space shuttles were going up, I'd watch them as they'd blast off, maybe from Cape Canaveral, and see that what seemed to be such a large vessel. And I've also looked at the Washington Monument. But if you were to take the Titanic and turn it up on its end, it would certainly tower over both of those structures. 882 feet and a half wide, 92 and a half wide, and 882 and a half long. It was 5 times taller than the space shuttle. It took approximately a mile to make a 90-degree turn. Significant as we progress looking at the events of that night. Literally, the construction required about 3 years. It was so large in magnitude that it took 20 horses to pull just one of the 3 anchors, 15 tons each. The engines generated registered 50,000 horsepower. Now, I'm back in the day of muscle cars. Not too long ago, I sold a 57 Chevrolet. It was the 7th one that I've had. I know what it is about Chevelles and Cutlasses and GTOs and so on, but 50,000 horsepower. It would go at the breakneck speed of 25 miles an hour. But that was moving pretty quickly in the water. We could talk about all the luxuries that was built into it. The phenomenal grand staircase. The luxuries that indeed was unheard of in that particular time. It was an unheard of structure. And the way that the bulkheads literally were built, as you can see the water in this imagery, they believed that even if water penetrated a certain part of it, it would still float. Thus, dubbed the unsinkable vessel. Over 3 million rivets held it together, 46,000 tons altogether. The maiden voyage, Captain Smith, the best of the best as far as the White Star Line, pulled together for his last voyage. It was his retirement trip, ironically, the Titanic. And we could talk about a lot of other things, but interesting also is the fact that, and they have reconstructed what they believe to be the path, not only of the Titanic, but also the iceberg that broke loose and came down, inevitably to collide with this vessel, with hundreds and hundreds of people on board. It was such a phenomenal event at that time that there was over 100,000 people that came just to watch it break loose from the berth and begin that maiden voyage. Can you imagine? 100,000 people just came to see it and came to see it pull away from the dock. And as you can imagine, the mere size of it, even as it pulled away, everything seemed well. And they were off on a voyage that was going, hopefully, according to what White Star Line, hopefully would be establishing a record. They wanted to go from Southampton, England to New York City at a record time. They were already talking about the celebrations. They were talking about the newspaper headlines and what it was going to do for business for the White Star Line as a result of literally cutting drastic time off of crossing the ocean. They went out into the night, and everything seemed well. You can just imagine how they were partying, maybe drinking, playing cards, dancing, music, eating, no doubt extremely well. And likely all of the things were just unbelievably as they had anticipated. They literally were a part of an event. There had been many that had left New York City, traveled to Southampton just to be able to be a part of this maiden voyage of the Titanic. But then suddenly, icebergs. And suddenly, Captain Smith and those up in the bird's crow's nest saw what they were about to hit. And requiring approximately a mile to be able to make a right-hand turn, unable to avoid. No doubt they did everything they could at that time, frantically trying to turn and to swerve just enough to be able to miss it, but they were not able to do so. And they crushed into the side of the iceberg as it slammed into the side of the Titanic. Now, for some time, I have wondered how in the world can ice, I mean, we're talking about double-bottom boat, I mean, inch-thick plates of steel, and how in the world, I mean, surely that would just plow right through. But as we look at the way it was built, and the way that the water compartments and the water started pouring in, it is said by those that survived that within 20 to 25 minutes of the time of the impact that Captain Smith knew that they were doomed, knew there was no way they would survive. The mere listing of the ship, the instrumentation on board, was able to make that calculation. And he knew how few lifeboats there were. And he knew that many were going to die. Pictures that have been drawn, those of movies that have been made, have shown us those luxurious parts of the ship consumed in water. Other pictures of those that have created or been drawn by artists of the lifeboats pulling away from the Titanic. It is said that the first lifeboat had to be lowered approximately 70 feet over the side to reach the water. The last one or two was only 15 feet. And can you imagine what the people on the lifeboats were thinking as they plunged out into the cold night? Approximately 28 to 29 degrees, dark at night. You can only imagine how they had been dressed in some of their finest, and now they had to go out into a lifeboat and pull away. Having left their husbands, you see it was women and children that were allowed to be on the lifeboats. And then it broke it in two. And literally, the ocean consumed it. And it plunged to the bottom of the ocean with hundreds of people aboard. And while all of that may be mesmerizing to me, and likely interesting to you, our purpose tonight was not to have some kind of lesson on the Titanic. But I use that as somewhat of a laying of the foundation concerning what I want us to now look at what we can learn spiritually from that tragedy. You say, well, what in the world could we learn from that? I want to suggest about a dozen different points. And the very first one is intriguing at best. You see, sin in our lives is deceitful. An iceberg is also deceitful. The Titanic struck an iceberg, and I say, how can ice puncture that steel vessel? But you see, the iceberg protrudes above the water, I'm told about 10%, and over 90% at least is below the water. The one that hit the Titanic was about 100 feet above water, and thus Calculations would say that according to the weight of that which was under the water's level, it was about 20 times heavier. The Titanic weighed 46,000 tons without the load, without all the people, but 46,000 tons was nothing in comparison to the iceberg. Even if Captain Smith and his officers had looked out, and even if they were able to see it in plenty of time way on down ahead, and they could see it, they would have only seen a certain part protruding above. You see, icebergs are deceptive. But sin is as well. Satan dangles before our mind's eye. Oh, it's all right. You can do this. I mean, nobody's going to know. I mean, your mom and dad, they're not going to know. I mean, it'll be okay. I mean, just one drink or one smoke or whatever it may be that we're talking about that is a temptation to us, and Satan is dangling that beautiful, that utopian state before us and trying to get us to believe that it's going to be all right. You see, sin is deceptive. The alcohol commercials that we see on television, how beautiful they are, and the waterfalls and all the horses and everything imaginable that makes it look appealing. They don't show you the finished product of the brewer's art. They don't show you that slobbering drunk that's out cold in a ditch in his own vomit. Satan doesn't want you to see that. Sin will take you further than you want to go. Cost you more than you'll ever want to pay, keep you longer, and maybe consume you for the rest of your life. Sin is deceptive. And the Titanic hit the starboard side with the iceberg and protruded that amount of water in the calm of that moonless night. By the way, it is told that it was a very unique night. Normally there would be some movement in the water, and even with an iceberg that might be able to be seen, they'd be able to see it ahead of time because the water would kind of bump up against the iceberg and there would be the white foam or white caps. Not that night. And normally the moon would shine and radiate and make it possible. Not that night. The iceberg was so deceitfully hid. And as a result, a photograph that was taken from the Carpathian of the iceberg that was thought to be the one that sunk the Titanic. And you see, it's just some ice out there in the water. No big deal. Nothing to worry about. We might say that sin is harmless, innocent. Everybody's doing it. It's all right. It's acceptable today. Sin is no longer black and damning, is it? What Satan wants us to believe. That's not true. Number two, things can distract us from the urgent. Things, not wrong within themselves maybe, can distract us, take our minds away from that which is the most important, most crucial thing, vital and urgent in our life, but we're distracted. On the Titanic, they didn't have cell phones like we have today. They had telegraph. And those businessmen that were conducted business transactions, maybe some of them in their luxury and then in their wealth and all the commanding of power that they had, if nothing else, they wanted to communicate with those back home and telling them of all the great and wonderful time that they were having. And they took up the time on the telegraph. So? But you see, there were various telegraph messages that came in to the Titanic. Warnings concerning icebergs. And those that were using the telegraph on board the Titanic became so upset, don't bother us, leave us alone. We've got messages that we want to send. In other words, the things that they were wanting to do completely distracted them from that which was the most important, hearing the warnings concerning the conditions around them. And they were even upset with the warnings. They finally ended up telling the telegraph operator, tell them, just hush. leave us alone. We don't want to hear your messages anymore. And one ship not too far from them became upset at that and literally turned their telegraph off. A tragic set of circumstances that caused the death. I'll talk about it more in a moment. Number 3, we've got to prepare properly. As we're going through life, there are preparations that we need to make, not so much for our retirement, not so much for college funds, not so much for maybe a rainy day fund from the standpoint of if the refrigerator quits working or something else. All of those things might be a good thing to do, but I'm not talking about those type of preparations. But oftentimes, even in those areas, we prepare poorly, and they did as well. There was original plans to have 64 lifeboats on there, but they ended up deciding we don't need that many. I mean, this is the Titanic. It's a brand new vessel. I mean, we need more room for luxuries and things of that nature. So they cut it from 64 back to 16. Oh, when it came to food and things of that nature, they believed that it was unsinkable. They thought it was so great, and they made preparations. Look at the 43 tons of fresh meat, 40 tons of potatoes, milk and ice cream and things. They were going to fare sumptuously every day. They made preparations concerning how to eat, just not how to survive. They failed to prepare properly. Number 4. We need to understand that life is fragile and frail. When I pulled up here tonight, this afternoon in the parking lot, I spent a few moments on the phone. One of my good friends there for where I preach had back surgery a few days ago. They've had to rush him to the hospital. Some bleeding, swelling, screaming headache. They went in through the chest area to get to his back. You see, our physical body is so frail. 3 years ago, I watched as up on the screen in the surgical wing, a surgical room, as they went in through my arm to get to the veins, the blockage, the 95% blockage. You see, I didn't even know about it. This body could have ceased to exist. I could have died simply because of a blockage or maybe some plaque that broke loose or whatever it may be, heart attack and stroke and things of that. And we know how frail we are. As we drive down the road, we're merely inches or a few feet at the very most away from the oncoming car. And we've seen the devastating accidents that have taken lives. The same is true of that vessel. Those 3 million rivets, the steel plates, and they popped. A gash in the side of it, just as if it was a piece of paper, and water poured in. Number 5, we learned from the Titanic that we need to heed the warnings. Look at it. The Corona at 9 a.m., the Baltic at 1:42, the America, Californian, the Californian again. All of the various messages that other ships around nearby, and they had traveled through those waters. They knew exactly that there was not just small little places of ice, but large icebergs that could destroy a vessel. But because the telegraph was being used, because they were too interested in setting a world record, because they were having too good of a time, they just ignored them. But now let's make the spiritual application. How many times are we warned in God's holy word? Take heed lest thou fall. Watch and pray. Be cautious. Be not conformed. And on we go. Concerning our thinking too highly of ourselves, the thinking of too highly of material things, The realizing that death is coming to all of us and that this life is not what it's all about. God has told us that we're living in a time of preparation. God has said there's going to be a prepared place for you, but only for those that are prepared. And it's up to us to make sure that we heed the warnings. Satan says, don't listen. Satan says, you got plenty of time. Satan says, oh, they're just trying to get you emotionally charged, get you to do something you shouldn't. Those on the Titanic did not heed the warnings. They collided with the iceberg about 11:40. They sank at 2:20. But we need to ask the questions, do we believe that dangers exist around us? Are we really afraid of Satan? Do we know how vicious he is? Do we know that he lies to us? I mean, deceives, and he has wiles, and he's going to do everything and tell us anything that he might be able to say to trap you, to ensnare you, and to destroy you. Number 6. I remember a song some years ago. What's going to date me? I dare maybe some of you may remember it. Mac Davis's song, Stop and Smell the Roses. Sometimes we're traveling at such a rat race pace. I mean, our life is best described as the tyranny of the urgent. We get up each day and maybe we're running to put this fire out, to get to another fire, to put it out, and maybe, hopefully, mark 2 or 3 things off of our list. We're traveling so fast that at times, no longer are we able to spend time letting God talk to us as we read His Word, talking to God as we pray to Him. My family is from Warren County, Tennessee, McMinnville, Tennessee area. Graduated high school there. At 207 Rebel Hill Street, my mom and dad owned the house there. I had 2 different porches. On the side porch, a swing. My grandmother, Sane, would sit there with her Bible that was literally in pieces, but her life was not. She took time for God. She wasn't traveling too fast. She was 90 plus years of age at that time. But she knew what was most important. There may be a lot of things that were swirling around her at that time, but she was not traveling so fast. Number 7, wealth. We learned from that event that wealth is worthless. Now, I know what the world, how it looks at it. It's all about the almighty dollar. But there were several millionaires on board the jet set, as it might be called. I mean, they literally were arrogant and prideful, and they no doubt believed that the Titanic was unsinkable, that it's all right no matter what's going to come along. It'll be fine. And besides, we travel a long distance just to be able to get to where we are now, to enjoy this phenomenal time. But when some of them had to put their wives and children into a lifeboat and stay behind, can you imagine? They may have been millionaires, more than maybe all of the other people put together on board, let's say, just for the sake of the point. And they would have given every penny of it for just one seat on a wooden lifeboat. You look at those that were on board. The Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss, the one that started Macy's, railroad company magnates. And the majority of them died that night. Number 8. We need to accept the reality of death. I've mentioned it multiple times, no doubt from this pulpit. It's been said over and over and over again. This world is not our home. This is not where we're going to be. We're all terminal. We're all going to die. Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. We're all terminal. But even after striking the iceberg, many of them said, oh, what was that? Oh, it's just a jolt. We're okay. And many of them kept on dancing, kept on going about. They thought it was just the Titanic. They kept on playing. And literally, the first lifeboats were only partially filled. They didn't want to put a life jacket over their nice clothes. They didn't want to go out into the dark night. It was cold out there. They did not believe, even to the point of they teased and made fun of some of the ones that did get in the lifeboat at first. The lifeboats would seat about 65. According to some of the survivors, the first two lifeboats had only 25 to 30 to 35 people aboard. They didn't believe that death was literally minutes away. Number 9. As I mentioned a moment ago, some of them did not want to get in the lifeboats. The first two were only partially filled. But what is so different with us? You say, oh, wait a minute, man. We're not on a boat and we're not sinking and we're not trying to get in. No, that's true. But you see, the lifeboat of which we're comparing it to is the church. And some people are hesitant to obey Christ, to become a Christian, to get in the lifeboat. A lot of people think, well, I've got plenty of time. I'm all right. I'm going to. I intend to one of these days. I certainly want to get to heaven, but not just yet. Don't you know? Those that made fun of those that got in the first couple of lifeboats, can't you imagine how much regret was in their heart as the 14th, 15th, and 16th lifeboat filled to capacity and beyond? We've got to get in the lifeboat. They knew that they were doomed, and 1,500 were still on board. Number 10, we can be so near and yet so far. I mean, literally, we can go to church all the time. We can be there every time the door's open, but we may not be members of that church. We may not be a part of the family of God. You see, spiritually, we're lost, but we're so near, but we're so far. Just like the Californian was 10 miles away. But you remember about the telegraph? They were the ones that turned the radio off. Had that not happened, 10 miles would have easily been able to have been and reached them before it was too late. And none would have died that night. But they wouldn't listen. The Carpathian was 58 miles away, tried to help, tried to get there, but the Carpathian did not arrive until about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the Titanic sank at 2:20. Various times we find in the Bible similar situations. Moses, because of his unbelief, because of his not giving God the glory, he was told he's not going to be allowed to go to the promised land. He was allowed to see it from Mount Nebo across the valley. He could see it, but that was this close. He was so near, yet so far. King Agrippa, almost thou persuadest me. Paul said, I would that you were like I am, not just almost, but completely and totally. It seems like only a couple of days ago, but it's close to a year ago now. A tragic automobile accident in our area, and 3 teenagers were killed that night. Hard to say that anything good can come out of that. 3 lost their lives. But in a way that probably might not have ever made such an impact upon the teenagers remaining on earth. There were 6 that obeyed the gospel, becoming a child of God within the next 14 days. You see, they had been close, but yet they were so far away. But now, because of a tragedy, because they realized how brief life can be, they said, I'll wait no more. Number 11, We learn from the Titanic that families will be separated. I cannot stretch my imagination to fully appreciate what it would be to be on a vessel and help my wife, now of 53 years, onto that boat and tell her goodbye for the last time here on earth. Now, I know here is just for a brief time. I know that we're going to live forever in eternity, but merely to say goodbye, not knowing that I'll see you tomorrow, the next day, or the next day, whenever it may be. Can you imagine the heartstrings, the sobs, the weeping of both the wife and the children, as well as the fathers that were left behind, the husbands that were left behind, families? But spiritually, it'll be the same way. The sheep from the goats, remember? Those that are children of God in that family, at the coming of the last day, the day of the Lord, and the wife or the husband, the son or the daughter that's not a Christian, that hasn't obeyed the Lord's commands. And there will be that separation. Prepared or unprepared. It is said that Isidore and Ida Strauss, she refused to board lifeboat number 8. She insisted that her maid take her place. She did not want to be separated from her husband and chose to die that night. And then comes the end. The end is coming to all. In 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9 and other places we read about the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night when we least expect it. And Simon Peter tells us that the earth and all that is in it shall melt with fervent heat, shall be dissolved. Not too long ago, I had an occasion to stand in New York City at Times Square and look up to those unbelievably huge and tall, towering buildings. My son-in-law and I were in New York City, downtown Queens and Manhattan area, 2 weeks before the towers were bombed by the airplanes. We made pictures as we looked up. But we can imagine any and every structure that we identify with in all of the world. And God's word says they're all going to be destroyed. All of the gold in Fort Knox, all of the valuables of any, whether it be diamonds or anything imaginable, gone. The end. But I want to also ask you this final thought. Is it possible that we are guilty of thinking that we're unsinkable? It's not going to happen to me. Maybe somebody else, not me. Do we maybe, we might not ever put it into words, but is it possible that we think we're invincible, that we're going to live forever, that I'm okay? Others, I know, but not me. Do we need to consider and believe that the world will end? It will cease to exist, that it will be burned up? I know we've never seen anything like that, and thus it's only by faith, but do we have the faith to believe what God has said? Spiritually, are we near the last lifeboat? There's going to be the time in your life that you will attend the last worship service. There will be the time come in your life, at what time I don't have a clue, that you will sing the last invitation song. There'll be that time that you will have the last opportunity of making absolutely certain that your life is right with God. And folks, I'm not exaggerating when I say it could be tonight. We don't have a promise of another day. We actually do not have a promise of leaving the building. In Amos chapter 4 and verse 12, we're told to prepare to meet thy God. And tonight, by this particular crude illustration, just by looking at some tragic event that took place and took hundreds and hundreds of lives physically from this earth, but I plead in behalf of your soul. Spiritually, are you right with God? Please listen to the words of the hymn. In a moment, we're going to stand. We're going to blend our voices together, and we're going to plead in your behalf. We're going to try to encourage you the best that we can. We're not going to make you. I'm not going to come down and jerk you out of the aisle and bring you down to the front against your... No, wouldn't do any good if it could. But I'm going to say again, if you are not in a way that is pleasing to God, and if you died tonight, if heaven would not be your eternal home, please come to Christ as we stand and sing.